Thank you very much. Very, very nice to see all of you. Thank you, Mr. Flowers, and thank you very much to President Harrison for your kind and fine remarks. And it's a wonderful week in Columbus, graduations at multiple places. And they're among the most exciting days of our lives, those of us who have the privilege of working in education, because we get to see the culmination of the effort of so many people over so much time reflected on this day. And one of the real special privileges of being in an academic administrative position on commencement day is that we get to sit on the stage and look at the glowing faces of the graduates and to see the proud family members who sit in the audience around them and think of the great stories that exist before us. So it's a very big honor and privilege to be able to spend these few moments with you. When I think about my life, one of the things that I remember first, I have a much older brother, and I remember his graduation from high school as one of the early things that was a real ceremony. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I remember several things about that day, even now into the next century. I remember it was hot. I remember the speeches were too long. But I remember also having great pride in my brother and what he'd accomplished, and actually was able to go to other graduations of his over the years, and it was always a wonderful day, something to look forward to. I'm also excited to be here today because Columbus State and Ohio State share a great partnership, one that is very much in evidence today. We have the privilege of having many Columbus State alumni as our students, and many more will be joining us this summer and fall. And our universities are all working toward the same goal, to try to extend the promise of an outstanding, affordable college education to as many people as possible. And I want to take a moment to commend the leadership at Columbus State. I mentioned already particularly President Harrison, but also the faculty and staff for their efforts on behalf of our partnership. I know how well these efforts can help someone move forward. I finished high school at 16 and began at a community college just a few blocks from my house before transferring to a 4-year college. And I know that those years were very positive and productive years in my life and helped open a vista to the future, which I'm happy to have been able to have the opportunity to participate in. Your education is a great foundation for whatever you're going to do next. Some of you will go to work on Monday with a new degree. Some are on a path to more higher education. Some will be starting families or running businesses. Some will be taking your current life circumstances and making them better. No matter what you choose to do, no matter what happens next, all of these are wonderful outcomes, and they are enhanced by the quality of your education, and you've done a great deal to advance them forward. And there are hundreds of success stories represented here before us. And as President Harrison said, there are many who are the first in their family to be earning a degree in higher education. Could those who are the first in their family to graduate raise your hand just so we can see? That's a wonderful group. And there are some of you who have continued to work as you were going to school. Can those of you who have worked while you were in school raise your hands? My goodness. And finally, some of you have been raising families. Can those of you who've been raising a family while going to school, raise those hands came up pretty quickly. And actually, we know that there's some of you who are doing all three. And what an amazing thing that is for all of you who have taken this great step forward to improve your lives and to improve our community. So again, congratulations to everyone who's here. I have a story. I think graduations are good when they have stories and when they have a bit of advice. The story is one I actually heard told at another graduation ceremony. It was shared with me and others by Dr. Gloria Wilder, who is a pediatrician in Washington, D.C., and she was telling a story about some inspiration in her life, and I think it has a great message, and I will share that with you. So she grew up in the 1970s in the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of New York. She lived with her mother and her 2 siblings. Her father was in the neighborhood, but not really a part of the family. He had issues with drugs and was mostly homeless, so she'd see him sometimes. But actually, she was often embarrassed when she would see him because he might be sleeping on the street she was walking to school. And so he was there, she knew him, but he wasn't a part of the family. In fact, he passed away before she finished high school. But she tells a story of a weekend when she was about 8 years old. And she and her family she had a low-income family, and so they were on a school lunch program, and I think they also had breakfast and other meals at school. And that worked great. They'd have weekends, though, at sometimes when there was no food in the house. Most of the time they had food in the house, but sometimes she'd get to a weekend and there was no food. And so one Saturday morning, she awoke and her mother gathered the kids together and said, you know, we have no food in the house between now and Monday, so you need to look around the house and see if you can find some change. And she said they looked in the couches and whatever else to get a little bit of money. And then she sent them out onto the street to see what coins they could find. And Gloria said they were out until about 2:30 in the afternoon, and she remembered that by the time they got back, they had collected 96 cents. And so her mother took a little note and said, okay, I want you all to go down to the corner store and get us a loaf of bread and a quarter pound of bologna, and that'll take us through until Monday. And so the three kids walked down, and when they got to the store, actually they were a bit embarrassed. The money was in a brown paper bag that they collected it in. A bit embarrassed, and Gloria was sort of deputized to go into the store and order the loaf of bread and the bologna. And she went in, and that store was, the man who ran the store was a man named Duke, and she went up to Duke and said, like a quarter pound of bologna and a loaf of bread. And Duke called back to the stock clerk and said, okay, a quarter pound of bologna and a loaf of bread. And as he was doing this, there was a bell on the door, and the bell rang, and some other kids from the neighborhood came bopping in. It was a hot day. And they lined up in back of her, and it was clear from their giggling and all that they were there to get ice cream. Now, everybody in the neighborhood was poor, but nobody wanted to be the most poor. And they were standing there chatting a bit, and Duke looked down at Gloria, I guess, and saw something in her face of how embarrassed she was in this circumstance, holding the bag of coins. And so he called back to the stock clerk, and he said, okay, I want to make sure I got that order right. That's a pound of bologna, 2 loaves of bread, some tomatoes, a pound of cheese, a quart of milk, and a pint of ice cream. And then he took this much larger bag and gave it to Gloria, and she sort of sheepishly took it and turned to walk out. And as she was walking out, he said, oh, excuse me, young lady, you forgot something. And she thought there'd been a mistake or whatever, and turned back around to him and said, you forgot your change. And he reached in the cash register and gave her a quarter. Worth applause. And he said, say hi to your mama for me. And she left. And she said that moment of his kindness and his thoughtfulness, and she said the way when she was passing the brown paper bag across the counter, he kind of wrapped the bag in his hand so the other kids couldn't see it, that inspired her to try to do something with her life. And she focused herself on a career, and she said that quarter turned her into a medical doctor, and she went to Howard College and Georgetown Medical School. Congratulations, Gloria. And she's now a CEO of a company that focuses on health promotion. She's been on Oprah and had a wonderful career there. And it shows the power of what a simple act of kindness can do. In fact, Duke lived long enough to be able to come to her graduation from medical school, and it was a wonderful thing for him to be able to see. And I mention this story because it lets us know that a small act of kindness, being present in our lives, thinking about what's happening, and doing something small and focused to help somebody take a step forward can have wonderful repercussions later on in life. And I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. I would say that there are other things that we can do as well to help things work well for ourselves, and things we do for other people are really, really important. Also, things that we do for ourselves can be important, and it's a graduation speech, so I want to give some advice if I can. I promise it will be short. So the first thing that I think is really, really helpful is to have a values-driven life. And by a values-driven life, I think you ought to take a moment here or there and kind of think about what matters to you and why. And if you said, what matters to me and why, and wrote down things that were important to you, those things that are important values. And then remember those values and try to use them to guide your decision making.
What happens is if you follow those values, follow your values, and the great thing about this is you get to set your own values, so you get to do it. If you stay true to your values, you'll find that your life will tend to unfold in ways that you like, that you'll be in places that you like, that things that you like will happen to you, that the people who are around you will respect you and honor you, and you'll be surrounded by love and support, and you'll feel good about yourself. If you deviate from those values, you'll feel it, and you'll find yourself in places that you don't want to be. And the nice thing about this is that it's your own values and your own guide that helps you to move forward. I was thinking of a story of one of our two sons, and he was involved in a minor degree of, I had real wonderful boys, involved in minor high school mischief at one point, and it had to do with eggs in another neighbor's house, and I can't remember the details well. There was no omelet, but maybe the fixins for an omelet were involved. And he was and this all came to light, a little later. He was very embarrassed, and he says, crying, and he said, "Why couldn't you have been there to let me know not to do that?" And I said, "You knew not to do it, and you were there. And you're always there, knowing what to do and what not to do, and all you have to do is listen to yourself, and you'll be fine." And let me say that mostly, no, he truly had listened to himself wonderfully, and it was a great way to know that you could be the one to advance yourself forward. Another thing that I think is really, really important, in addition to, in fact, let me say one thing. I'll tell you the list of values that I use for myself, just so you'll know. And I thought of these one morning. I had to give a speech. I said, gee, I should write some down, and so I wrote down the values. I thought that 7 was a good number, and I've been doing what I could to follow them. They've been very, very, very helpful to me. At times I didn't expect. So the values that I tend to use are respect for yourself as well as respect for other people, intellectual curiosity, being interested in learning and teaching and growing, integrity, a really, really important one. That means that you say what you mean and you mean what you say, that you can build trust with people. Commitment and passion, and making it that you really do commit yourself to doing a good job of what you're doing. Empathy, caring for other people, caring about other people. Appreciation of the circumstances that other people find themselves in. You could call that tolerance, but I think I'd like it to be a higher level than tolerance, that you appreciate that people have had different lives and they're where they are for a variety of reasons. And finally, fun. I think our lives ought to be fun. We ought to do things that make it that we're having fun. And the deal is you try and do all of them together all the time. And if you do that, if you were to describe somebody who you respected, who was intellectually curious, who had great integrity, who was really committed to what she was doing, had great empathy for people, but also appreciation for their circumstances, and was always up for having a good time, you'd be describing somebody who you loved and admired and wanted to spend time with. And you behaving in that way will help you be that person for the people around you as well. So I wrote those down. They help me a lot, and I think of them whenever I can, particularly when I don't know what I'm doing. And let me, one more story, and then I'll go to my final advice bit. Another story about my younger son, who was a cross-country runner when he was in middle school and high school and college. Did very well, and very proud of him. But particularly in middle school, he was All-American, terrific. He'd win races, so he'd be out in front. And the cross-country races would be in parks, and they'd be kind of off in the woods, so the course wasn't marked so clearly, so you had to pay attention to where the course was. And I would tell him routinely that you need to pay attention to where the course was because there's going to be no one for you to follow. And he would pay about as much attention as an 11-year-old, would pay to you. And at least on one occasion, he ran off course, off into the woods someplace. And it was a good reminder of that if you're going to be out front and going to be a leader, you have to be able to find ways to guide yourself and to look for those guideposts. And in our lives on a daily basis, our values can be those guideposts, those things that we look for when they're helping to guide us through, particularly circumstances where there's no clear or easy answer or there's no one in front of us to follow. So my other 2 pieces of advice. The first is part of one of my values, and that is in all things you do, try to do your very best. A perfect job is you doing your best. The outcomes will be sometimes exactly what you'd like and sometimes not what you like, but if you do your best, you know that you've given your best, and that will get you as close to the best outcome as possible. I'm a medical doctor, and I was given advice before I graduated from my father-in-law, who was a medical doctor also, about how to examine patients. And his advice was, when you examine a patient and you finish that examination and you're leaving the room, imagine that you're going to run into the chief of service coming into the room as you're leaving. And make sure that you know that if she goes and examines that patient after you, she's not going to find anything that you didn't find, unless it was something you just don't understand or don't know. But she's not going to find something you didn't find because you didn't do your best job. And I will tell you, I thought of that 1,000 times during an examination of a patient when I wasn't completely sure that I'd done my best, or I'd really seen what the right eye looked like after I'd looked at the left. And I would always go back and spend that extra 10 seconds or 15 seconds making sure I'd done a good job, and I was always glad that I did. So I'd say for you, just to make sure in what you're doing, that you're doing your best work, so you know that if somebody comes after you, that you don't have any regrets about what you could have or should have done. You know you did your best work. Sometimes they'll find something you didn't know. That's great. You get a chance to learn from that. But you don't want it to be something that you knew to do or should have done and left behind. And finally, the last thing is that the most important person in helping to create your future is you. And you need to remember that. You know, we all have this thing that we do. We kind of envision the future. We look ahead and decide what we'd like to be doing or what those circumstances might be. And I think the biggest mistake that we make is that we don't put ourselves into that picture. When you put yourself in the picture, you realize that the outcome of that picture can be affected positively, and that the person who's in the best position to affect that outcome positively is you. And I know that all of you know this very, very well because you've all done that to be here today. You've looked at your future and what your future was going to be, and you've said, I can take hold of this, I can do something about it, I can be a participant in my life, and I can change my life. And congratulations to all of you for having done that. I want to finish with a quote from a poet who I like a lot. His name is Rabindranath Tagore. How many people here know Tagore? There's a hand up if it goes up. That's actually good news. So the good news is that Tagore, T-A-G-O-R-E, is an incredible Indian poet who was very active a century ago, Nobel laureate in 1912, the first non-European Nobel laureate in literature, T-A-G-O-R-E. And any one of you who spends a moment looking up Tagore will spend a moment that's worth your time. One quick one that I will share with you, one of Tagore's sayings was that you can't cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water. You have to seize the reins and allow things to move forward. You've all done that. This has been an incredible journey for you. You're at the end of this particular phase. It's time to cross over and begin another phase. With your diplomas in hand, you'll be ready for tomorrow. Let me say congratulations to the class of 2015 and Godspeed.